call to order this special meeting of the Public Safety Committee. Roll call, please.
Chairman Plufka.
Here.
Alderwoman Sims. Here. Alderwoman O'Neill. Alderman Lockmiller.
Here.
All members present.
Thank you all for being here tonight. Have you had a chance to look over the agenda?
Yes.
Anybody want to make any changes or offer any changes to the? Seeing none, the agenda will stand as submitted. The only piece of new business, which is under 3A, is the recommendations for traffic calming measures related to the Manchester Road detour. And I had taken some time to talk to some different department heads prior to the beginning of this meeting. And what I'd like to do, if it's possible, is to invite them up to the podium one at a time, beginning with the Brentwood Police Department, to talk about their efforts since the detour began to deal with cut-through traffic and the like. Thanks, Chief.
Good evening, thank you. I was going to cover some of the efforts of the police department since May 2nd on the closures. Obviously, we've been inundated, particularly on Rosalie and Eulalie and streets associated close to those neighborhoods with additional traffic. So a lot of the effort of the police department's been in that area. We've also seen an influx along the Eager corridor as the traffic was diverted up Brentwood to Eager. So right now, as we talk, we've had 3 calls for service, which I thought was a pretty low number, but calls that came in through our 911 system or the non-emergency system, we've only had 3 calls for service. That doesn't include some calls we've received from neighbors and citizens outside of the 911 system. But there has not been directed calls for service really that have been driven by the closure at this point. Right now we're at 22 details that have been initiated by the police department. What that means, officers are being disconnected from their normal tour of duty, and they're assigned by their supervisors into different areas. Oftentimes these are, at this point, they're on Rosalie, Eulalie, Litzinger, Cecilia, areas like that. So that means they will sit on stop signs, they will do traffic details that include running radar on those streets and areas that are most affected. Out of those details that have been done, there have been 7 car stops on Litzinger, 20 car stops on Rosalie, 19 stops on Eulalie, 3 on Cecilia. And out of those car stops that are written, there have been numerous warnings given. And there's also been a total of 34 official citations or tickets written to drivers in the area. One of the things to note that I thought was kind of interesting was we pulled the numbers from April 1st through April 11th and compared them between that and May 1st and May 11th. Currently, we are down 1 accident, and this is for all of the city of Brentwood. So I thought that was a little bit of a surprise. I would have thought with these closures it would drive our numbers. And the affected streets that are really most concerning, we've had 1 accident that's been reported to the police department, and that was a woman who struck a truck accidentally, and the truck was parked, so it was a parked vehicle, and she sideswiped the truck. That was the numbers that we had. Alderman, I'd open to any questions if you had them.
I have one, and then I'd like to open up the rest of the committee. How is the city compensating the officers in these additional details?
We do have officers that are working overtime, so our overtime funding is being used for some of it. Typically we've had at least 1 officer here on overtime for several hours each day. But we really are relying on the on-duty, particularly day watch officers, to stay in that area as much as they can, and that was the result of all the details I talked about that they're calling out on.
How sustainable is that financially, do you think? I mean, considering we're talking about between now and August.
I mean, it'll be a challenge. It'll be a discussion that my boss and I have eventually here. Yeah, it's expensive.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? Steve?
We're in this about a week and a half now. That Monday, there was quite a bit of confusion as people were trying to find their legs as much publicity as we put out there, drivers still didn't heed the warnings. And kind of panicked and trying to find their way through our neighborhoods. Are we seeing that starting to drop off? Is it staying constant? What's the
I
numbers?
rode around up there for 2 hours today, just kind of trying to get a feel for the different streets on the side streets. There's still more traffic than there typically would be. I think it's gotten better certainly since May 2nd. But just today, as an example, our officers stopped 11 cars on those 2 streets that we are most affected by. So I guess the short answer to your question is it's better, but this is going to be an issue for the next 3 months.
Okay, thank you.
Else have any other questions? Sunny?
Do you have any information available as to the people that you pulled over? Are they Brentwood residents? Are they out-of-towners?
I don't know the exact percentage, but I can tell you that I throw you a number, it's probably about half residents. The officers do, more anecdotally, I guess you'd say, indicate who they're stopping, because we are interested, are these Brentwood folks that they're stopping? And there are pretty many of them, probably more than I would have thought there'd be, because our messaging in the city of Brentwood's been very strong. So, you know, you would have thought that the side street issues for traffic control would have been probably, maybe we need more education in that level in the city, I don't know, but I'm not really sure what else we can do. There's been a lot of it. And there's a lot of signs out now as well. I mean, you see the local residents only signs and things like that. We are using the speed trailer, we're using the messaging trailer, and Dan Gummersheimer's folks have done a good job using other signage. So I don't know how much more we can do in terms of signage, to be honest with you.
On the what I think Rosalie and Eulalie primarily, and or the streets, Cecilia, the ones you mentioned. As I sit here, I thought all of those were local traffic only streets. Am I correct in that belief?
Yeah. So Alderman Pluffy, and I think this is coming up later, so I won't beat on it, but that local traffic only issue is kind of nefarious in terms of how it's enforced. It's a difficult thing to enforce.
What about signs? Because I thought I saw one, a prohibition of trucks over a certain size. That seems like that could be easier to enforce.
Yeah. It's complicated now because we have the work going on by MSD. So we do have big trucks in the neighborhoods, and that's aggravating this situation to some degree. So yes, there are ways to, by ordinance, that you can restrict that traffic, but in the circumstance, and MSD is a good one, they're going to be in the neighborhood with their big dump trucks. They have to be.
If you found yourself, if an ordinance was passed, I don't know if there's one on the books now, but I thought I saw a sign like that, but let's say that's a lever that we pull to try and address this issue, and you pull over a truck over that size, which seems to me to be easier to identify than whether someone's local or not, and they say, hey, I'm from MSD, isn't the result that they're let go, or with a warning, or they prove themselves? And
yeah, I mean, if they're part of the MSD project, they're not getting a ticket. We can't ticket the big trucks coming in to do that work on these side streets. I mean, that doesn't make sense. They wouldn't be able to work. So there certainly are exemptions to that rule, yes.
And I don't know if this is a question best directed to you or somebody else, maybe Dan. According to my internet research, so take that with a grain of salt, the GPS maps aren't showing that Rosalie is open yet. Is there a way we can call Google Maps and have them? It seems to me that might. I mean, I know for the people who live on Rosalie, they're not going to like that, but the people on Eulalie, I think, will. That is a wider.
I don't know the answer to that.
I
I don't know how you get to Google Maps. Sorry. Dan might know. I think Dan probably does know.
All right. Thank you. I don't have any other questions. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Chief.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to call up Dan Gummersheimer from our Public Works Department and ask you to comment on the situation, but to give us some commentary with regard to, so at the last meeting of the Board of Aldermen, we authorized the purchase and the deployment of, I think, 3 rumble strips in that area. Kind of give us an update on what that process is, what that looks like in terms of timing. And then secondly, there was, it's unrelated to this detour, but there was still construction going on Rosalie and limitations there. What's the status of that? What's the status of our signage and the temporary road that connects White to Swim Club Drive? But then last but not least, can you also confirm for us whether or not MoDOT believes that they're still on target to reopen in that first week of August?
Yeah, it's actually, I believe, the 3rd or 4th week of August.
Oh, is it? I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
But to answer that question quickly, yes, they just started it, but, they haven't seen any unforeseen conditions. But again, it's in its infancy. They haven't, gotten very far with the construction, or actually demolition.
How often do they update you on that?
We have weekly meetings, so this was a Tuesday meeting, but normally it's on Mondays at 1:30. So, and it's a group meeting, so it's not just us, it's KCI, who's their contractor, it's some of the subs, and it's Navigate, and it's Kirkwood, because, it affects multiple cities. It's not just a Brentwood issue, it's Manchester, from Kirkwood all the way, heading through Brentwood and beyond. And then I had kind of written some high-level notes just to kind of bring you up to speed. So, before the closure, which actually occurred on May 2nd, Public Works delivered notices of the bridge closure on streets with only Manchester access. So that would be like your Fawn, your Porter, Lewis, Melvin, any of those streets that the only way to get around is to come back down Manchester. So we did notify folks on Cecilia or Mary because they have multiple ways of getting around. Because we thought, well, it's been on social media, it's been on the city's website, but we went old school and just did letters and envelopes and door hangers. So if you had no access to a smartphone or computer, you're still almost like a postcard, just to let you know. And then we also put the contact information for ourselves as well as the folks with KCI. So if they had a problem with whatever, you can call the project superintendent instead of calling me, who's just going to in turn call the superintendent. And then, as we mentioned, the detour or the closure happened on May 2nd, and then we started seeing issues. Police called us right away because the detour signs weren't up by the Sonic. So that's Mercantile to Brentwood Industrial to Breckenridge. So for whatever reason, Traymar, who's the subcontractor that makes the signs, they didn't have them ready that Monday, but they were put up, I believe, Tuesday. So if you drive out there now, you'll see orange signs with arrows, and it loops you around. So the idea is, if you're going eastbound, is to get you looped around so that you don't go eastbound all the way past Joy Luck and you come to the road closed signs. Some of the other things we did, let's see. Oh, the Bullet called me up last week, Friday, and like the Arby's entrance and then the entrance to 8710, 8706 Manchester were being not necessarily blocked, but very difficult to see. Well, actually, take that back. The Arby's was blocked. So you couldn't get to Arby's from Manchester because of those concrete Jersey barriers. It basically creates a partition between Manchester and the business. So I contacted them Friday. On Monday, they started moving the barriers. Long story short, you now can get to Arby's from Manchester rather than they were forcing people to drive through Ace, which you can, and there's cross access to get to Arby's. So now you've got both entrances. And then the business right to the east of Arby's, they rearranged those barricades, and they're also making up signs that would say business entrance or something to that effect, so that if you're a delivery driver or people going to visit those businesses, you'll see that there is an entrance between those Jersey barriers. Some of the other stuff that MoDOT addressed that we brought up to their attention, they put one of those CMS, it's a message board. They put a message board at the rec center. They asked permission to put it there, so that if you're driving southbound and wanting to turn onto Manchester Road, make that left, then go eastbound, it mentions that there's a closure before you get to Hanley. They also added no outlets / local traffic only signs at Lewis and Salem and some other streets. Staff ordered signs that say local traffic only to put on barricades. Police came and got those and put them wherever they felt they were needed. And then going back to your original question, from Monday's meeting, we ordered crowd control barriers, like orange fences about 6 foot long. Those we figured we could use somewhere else, maybe to help create choker, to reduce the road width. Those just showed up yesterday, so we have those. And then I did order 3 speed cushions from Tapco, but as I mentioned in that meeting, your deliveries are so long with supply chain and whatever other issues people throw out, but it's about an 8-week delivery. So whenever I talked to them, they said you're looking at right around June 28th. And that was for 3 of them. So I purchased 3 of them based on measurements that would fit either a 24 or 26-foot wide street. So it could go on, say, lawn between, Brentwood and high school, as well as other streets. That dimension is kind of the sweet spot for most of our streets. There's the one that we put in at Pine near Hatton, that's longer because it's a wider street there. As you go east and the block of Pine between high school and Brentwood Boulevard, those speed cushions that we put in fit roughly a 24-foot wide street. So whenever they do show up, we'll have that ability to put them where they're needed. And then the data collectors we had sent out, they're still not back, but once we have the data collectors back, we can put those up wherever they're needed to kind of measure daily traffic, speeds, directional traffic too. It'll tell me east and west or whatever you're trying to measure. You just calibrate it, and then it tells you all the data you want. You can filter it. You can even filter by speed bins, so I can do 5-mile-per-hour increments and see how many vehicles and what % that represents of the total. So that's pretty much it. Hopefully I answered your questions. If not, just push me back to whatever you want to go back through in detail.
So tell us the status of the construction in that first block
Oh,
immediately
that's
east
correct.
on Rosalie.
So on Rosalie, the barricades, the big concrete barricades and the road close signage, that was removed on May 5th. So, and that's the block between Swim Club and Brentwood Boulevard. So just east of the post office, that was closed for, I don't even know how many weeks, but it was closed quite a number of weeks. So that's reopened. And part of the reason why that needed to reopen was so that the sewer work that's going on White, those trucks can go eastbound on White, take that temporary access road between White and Swim Club, come south on Swim Club, and then head out on Rosalie, head westbound.
Has that
That just
temporary-
started this week. That was Tuesday is when they started using that road, I believe.
That's what I was gonna ask. So, and has Luth employed a spotter?
They have, yeah. I haven't watched every single time they've done, but the one time I watched, they did have a spotter. I'm sure police and fire could speak to that. I know fire's been out there and others.
And then you mentioned these, I guess you called it fencing or maybe choker?
Correct.
Are those somewhat like a sawhorse, or what a sawhorse would do?
No,
in
they're
terms
bigger than that. What I would relate it to, like if you're waiting in a ticket line or something like the Delmar Loop or whatever, those are typically steel. These are 6-foot sections that are plastic, high-density plastic, and they're about 40 inches tall. And they lock together, so I can create a certain length, and they pivot, so you can make whatever angles you want. I thought you would kind of deploy them like sawhorses, where you would strategically place those so that as you see it, whatever direction you're heading in, you're gonna have to slow down or go through it.
How many of those do you have, do you say?
I have a total of 25 panels. And we also thought we would use it, for Brentwood days, we can use it like for sidewalk closures, because the problem we have now is if you put up cones or channelizers and put tape, I don't know why people do it, but sometimes they'll break the tape and just walk through it instead of leaving it in place. So I thought, well, this will give a little more of a challenge. You'll have to hurdle it or whatever.
Anybody on the committee have any questions for Dan?
Do we have anything in our warehouse now that could go down? I mean, if you want to call them rumple strips or temporary, humps, bumps, tape, whatever the terminology is that might be
The only thing we could use
sooner.
would be like barricades or something. I don't know. There was an article, it was Castle Point, I believe, was this city I'd never heard of. It's out in the county, but the county's using all kinds of traffic calming ideas. So they use like stacks of tires, and I know the city of St. Louis use big concrete spheres. The barricades that I purchased, I thought would kind of be used in that effect, because if a street's 24 feet wide, maybe you narrow it down to say 14, it would allow a pumper truck to go through, but not 2 cars to pass if there's barricades. And obviously you'd have to limit parking on the other side so that they don't have a parked car and then barricades, and then it's even narrower. But rumble strips, I would say, we would probably never purchase only because they make noise. I mean, that's part of the term rumble is that it vibrates whenever cars go over. And I thought, well, what if I put it in residential and it's midnight, it's 1 a.m. and people have their windows open, which probably wouldn't now when it's 95, but you know, if you did, I just don't want people upset that it's always making noise. But they do sell, when I purchased the barricades there, I got some product materials for a temporary rumble strip. It's weighted and it's in a little canvas sack and you can unroll it and lock them together, and then put a couple anchors in. So you could create your own temporarily. You know, they're not what I'd call expensive, you know, they're a few $100s. Compared to the speed cushions that we bought, of course, inflation drove that cost up too. Last year when we bought them, it's roughly $3,800 per set. Now it's $4,200. The lead time's a little worse. You know, we got the other ones in probably 6 weeks, 7 weeks. This is pushing 8, you know.
I mean, have you been able to identify, like, if I use the example of ukulele, you know, something that could go down to, you know, that would be for this period of time that wouldn't be designed to address, you know, the pain that's being felt now, but knowing that when it lifts, it's going to be better and maybe, you know, I mean, I know we've done traffic analysis
Right.
on that street, and in ordinary times, it will, you know, the conclusion or the data said that, you know, speed humps weren't supported, but I feel like that's a little, we're not in ordinary times, and that there be something that could go, I'm using that street to just figures prominently,
Right.
that could provide some relief, but is designed to address this temporary problem.
Yeah, the only thing, like I said, I could think of were barricades. You know, Eulali's challenging because some of Eulalie is narrower than others, obviously. Like when you get closer to the fire department, it's choked down. And then there's cars typically parked on both sides, so that's naturally going to slow you down, or at least I would hope it would. You know, the problem we saw in Rosalie was that there's no parking on that north side of Rosalie between Swim Club and Brentwood Boulevard. So I did look at the data again. You know, I ran different reports for all the different times we had put up the data collectors. And I think part of the problem with Eulalie is just perception. So to your point, it didn't warrant putting anything in, and that was because, you know, the traffic counts were so low, it was under 400 vehicles per day. I don't know what it is now. Obviously, we'd have to put the data collector up, but I think it's because on normal periods of time, it was less than 400 vehicles a day. Rosalie, by way of comparison, was typically over 1,000 vehicles a day. Strassner was over 1,000 vehicles a day. High school, like north of Litzinger, was 1,500. It's weird because high school had more traffic than Strassner, which I thought Strassner would have had more because it's more of a cut through between Brentwood Boulevard and Hanley. But, you know, looking at volume, and the speeds on Eulalie didn't rise to the level of any kind of concern at that time. And with enforcement, I would think that there's probably not nearly as great a concern now as there was, say, a week ago. You know, we can help work with police and fire and put something up on a temporary basis and see how it works. If there's still a concern, I don't know if there's still a high level of concern like there was a week ago.
Oh, I'm hearing a lot of concern.
Right.
I was at the meetings when we, you know, did the data in normal times, but I don't think we're in normal times.
Right.
And if there could be something that could be the understanding that it's designed to address this temporary problem. And I mean, that would be something I would support exploring. Then I don't know what that would, you know, the things that you stated, I mean, those sound like good ideas, but, you know, buys it.
Yeah, those barricades look like this. I don't know if you can see that from that far away, but these you can lock together. It's that for folks behind me.
Because, I mean, I'm given the impression that there are residents that are there with tickers, the volume of traffic that's
Right.
increased, and the size and the speed. And certainly, you know, I commend our police force for enforcement. I would be in support of a court press multi-solution approach, because this traffic's not going anywhere for the summer.
Can you remind, do you have a question? I'm sorry. Okay. Do Can you remind us the state of the signage? So I don't know that anybody's described, and I haven't driven it, so I don't know, but east of, in Maplewood, east of where the bridge is down, what signage did MoDOT deploy there to explain that the bridge was down at Hanley?
I don't know, because I haven't come that way. That's a good question. I've only traveled Brentwood Boulevard north and south,
Okay.
but not through Maplewood heading towards. I know that MoDOT worked with the county to adjust the signaling timing so that since you can't go straight anymore through that intersection, they
Yeah.
took that out so that option's removed, so it'll cycle quickly or more quickly so you can go north or south.
Okay. And then insofar as the signage that we control, on Hanley or within the city streets or on Brentwood Boulevard, is there anything in terms of signage that you see that you believe we're lacking at this point?
The only sign I saw, I looked at the MUTCD, the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. I found like a warning sign. It's a yellow diamond that has the speed limit on it. It would be like a high-vis sign. I don't know if I have a blow-up of it or not.
Can it be temporarily deployed by an easel or something like that?
Yeah, we would mount it. I did like a little diagram where we would mount it to maybe one of those barricades. So it's just got like an arrow and then 20 miles per hour. So what it's trying to do is get you to visualize that as you're going on this road, in this direction, you should be doing 20 miles per hour. Typically, you put those warnings up on interstates or other roads when the posted speed limit is, say, 30 and you want them to go 20. You're typically wanting them to decrease. It's a reduction warning.
And with the trucks now going down west, down Rosalie to Brentwood, we've got that speed cushion there. Are we going to need to remove that to keep them from damaging that?
I drove over today, and I mean, it still looks fine, and I mean, it's designed for heavy loads. They don't stay parked on it, they just drive over it. I know the sewer work that they're doing on Rosalie doesn't go that far east so that it would impact it. So right now, there's, I believe it's manhole 21S. You'll see there's a manhole, I think it's near, I'm trying to think what the house number is, if it's 8744 or something like that. But it's on the south side, several doors down from the post office, but it's not up to that speed cushion. So I was just gonna leave it because I thought, well, as Luth turns its trucks and goes on Rosalie, it's gonna purposely slow them down or anyone else.
I just thought maybe we could temporarily relocate that, but I don't know if it's designed for a wider street than what Eulalie is with the cars and.
I think that block of Rosalie's probably about 24 as well, so it could probably be squeezed in. The problem is that if I move it to Eulalie, am I then creating a problem on Rosalie that maybe it didn't have? I don't know.
And I don't know if our fire truck can maneuver that type of a speed cushion if it's not adequately spaced.
Mhm.
All right, thank you.
Going back to the painting on the pavement, in Illinois, as you cross the bridge and 64 goes one way and 57 goes one, and the lane painting really helps you figure out what you're doing so that you pay attention to it. And it's kind of here on 64 too. If we were to put speed limits on the lanes and paint them, it would wear off by the end of the summer. But would that help slow anything?
We could try it. I mean, that's easy because we have the paint. You would just buy the stencil. We have a paint gun, but then we also have the thermoplastic machine, which I wouldn't use because that's kind of a waste of the product. But to your point, the paint typically fades in less than a year. That's why we're constantly painting certain
Redoing
areas. With the thermoplastic, that's good for years. So most of our crosswalks now are thermoplastic where they're melted into
Yeah,
the
but
asphalt.
we don't need that.
Right, I wouldn't do that, but, we can call, that's something that's probably readily available at like traffic control, one of our vendors.
Just say 20 miles per hour limit or something on the
Yeah,
middle of the lane.
because they make sharrows like for bicycle lanes and stuff that they just paint
Yeah.
and then lift the stencil and put it somewhere else.
It might help a little.
Yeah, we can look into that. That's not a big deal.
Thank you.
All right,
Thanks,
that's it.
Dan. I appreciate it. The third part of this discussion or preamble to this discussion has to do with wanting to know what our legal authority is to close or limit access to streets, especially streets within the city of Brentwood. And I asked our city attorney, Kevin O'Keefe, to prepare a memorandum, which was very well done. And I would ask if you wouldn't mind just kind of summarizing what you had indicated in that memo.
Yes, sir. The city is vested with broad discretion to enact traffic regulations designed to protect public health, safety, and welfare. And city decisions to limit access to a given street or a direction of travel, or to close a street in a direction of travel, or close a street to through traffic has been supported by the courts. Obviously, as with any legislation, there has to be some rational basis between the measures taken and the public policy goals to be achieved. But the court does support local discretion. One of the items I mentioned in the memorandum, and to which the chief alluded, is the difficulty of enforcing some of the regulations. And that can really suck up manpower for little effect, but through traffic regulations require that the city be able to prove that the motorist didn't stop. And if you're not following the motorist through the course of travel, there's no way to prove that.
Right, so to effectively cite someone and then have that follow through into showing that they actually violated the local rule, the police officer would have to literally follow them through the entire process, and at the end of it, then ticket them if they didn't stop or didn't.
I suppose you could clock vehicles coming in and clock them coming out, which would require amazing coordination and a lot of evidentiary support. And of course, the problem is that without some probable cause, the issuance of the ticket would be problematic. And saying, I don't think they stopped is a discussion we ought to have someday. Perhaps not here and now, but.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions for the city attorney with regard to that memorandum? So with all that being said, I'd like to throw open the discussion to the members of the board. Are there, and Alderwoman Sims kind of alluded to stuff that you mentioned already, but are there things that you believe out of this collection of, calming or restriction efforts that we should consider as either a single or a package to then be considered by the full Board of Aldermen to be implemented when we meet next Monday? Throw it open that way.
I'll take a stab at it.
Okay.
What was it, as Alderman Weggie said, chainsaw math? I think you used that phrase. I would be in support of, and I don't, of directing the city staff to develop additional traffic calming measures that address the specific problem on the through streets that are suffering an influx of cars and speeders and larger sized vehicles. And I don't know, in terms of couching it in such a way that, I would be in support of, okay, we tried this, it didn't work, let's try this. I mean, that we could be nimble somehow and responsive to, well, we did our analysis and that choker isn't effective or is having an unanticipated consequence. Okay, well then let's reassess without getting, stuck in the mud of, or stuck in the weeds of delay, so that we could be responsive. Because I think we do have to balance that against unintended consequences of, if I use an extreme of just shutting off a street, I don't think is a solution. That's the one end. But on the other end, I think that there's something to do nothing, I don't think is a solution either. So that they, could have a multi-option approach. I mean, I liked a lot of the things that Dan was suggesting, and I would certainly defer to his expertise in analyzing where best to try it and deploy it, and then, okay, if that's not successful, then let's not give up. Let's try something else. And I also think from enforcement, and I don't know if this is, I think we need to be in a position with the police to, keep the pressure on and the resources that is going to take in order for them to be able to do that. I don't know if that's a budget amendment but that we're cognizant of the additional manpower we're putting out there and the related cost. And I think we need to make it a priority to find the cost.
So is there a collection of things that you want to propose as a motion for the committee to consider as a package to go forward? Do you want to start that ball rolling, or what do you want to?
Wordsmith it out. Well, I mean,
I'll
I
take
would,
notes.
I would characterize it as, a nimble, responsive approach that includes the items that Dan discussed, and that those things can be evaluated and deployed, during these road closures. I'm in no position to say, oh yeah, this barricade here is where it's going to work best. But I want to vest the city with the ability to try that, have it succeed or have it not succeed, and then if it doesn't succeed, that they could try something else without having to come back to us. And I think that's a very poorly worded motion, but that they could have a toolbox, that they would have things at their disposal to deploy.
Besides those deployable things, would you want the package to include the Board of Aldermen considering authorizing the continued use of overtime in the current level of enforcement that's going on in the area?
Yes, I would also include that, and I don't know if the way to couch it is continued use of overtime, but the end result would be has to have the resources and the manpower that they need to continue to enforce our traffic laws.
The continued level of enforcement.
Yeah, and I don't, however that shakes out in the budget.
Want me to second that?
It's kind of
that was
more like a
yeah. So the motion, as I understand it, and we will we'll provide a rationale that'll be something that the board can actually understand in sentence and paragraph form, but to empower the Public Works Department in concert with the Police Department and the Fire Department to deploy those calming measures that they've identified and that they've purchased and that are already in stock to slow traffic and to try to discourage cut-through traffic within the streets that we're talking about, in addition to authorizing the Brentwood Police Department to continue its level of enforcement.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, that's exact. Yes, that's what I meant.
This doesn't really come under the motion, but we have not talked about directing more people away from those streets. And I don't think there are as many detour signs on Brentwood Boulevard as there could be. If who is it, the county would put a detour sign every 2 blocks, all the way from Manchester up to Eager, it might make people follow those more rather than trying to go off on their own and find something else.
So you're asking, is it the ask for us to ask St. Louis County to deploy?
Because it's a county highway.
Right.
Can
I mean, I understand.
Can we put signage?
We can display signage that is adjacent to Brentwood Boulevard, just not, I mean, like, we can display signage that says you can't turn, local traffic only, things like that, to discourage people from turning off of Brentwood Boulevard.
We can try it, and then if we hear from St. Louis County, then we'll remove it.
Yeah, I think the county has to approve placing signs on the roadways,
On the roadways?
the right of way.
Okay.
Big orange signs that say detour and have an arrow going up to Eager Road might deflect a few cars from cutting through.
We have contact, so Dan can call our contact with St. Louis County to see if they would approve that.
But we're kind of at the mercy of the county on Brentwood and MoDOT on Manchester.
It's their road.
That clear.
So before I ask for a second to the motion that we kind of concocted there, I do want to ask at least about the more dramatic options that we seem to have at our disposal at least. And that would be either the closure of, I mean, the only place I can imagine it being any way effective would be if we closed Litzinger at the bridge or just to the west of the bridge and allowed Litzinger traffic from Hanley to go to those businesses, but not to proceed any farther into the neighborhood. In other words, barricade it off for the, for the last. Is there any appetite for
I'm
doing
confused
anything like
and-
that?
No, because the flip side is people would go down to that from the west. They would be going east, and all of a sudden they get to the bridge, and the bridge is closed, so they're not going to turn around and come back, and it makes 2 trips for that car instead of 1.
And
I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying, and I'm just thinking of one option here. I guess what I'm asking, and I shouldn't put so much of myself into that. What I'm really asking is, what's the appetite on this committee for employing that kind of a maneuver, closing a road?
I think they would put an undue burden on the residents that have to use that way into their homes, and I don't see that as an option.
Okay. Anybody else?
I tend to agree. I'm hoping that the other measures that we might be able to deploy would just slow and deter.
Off at the Ford.
Additional signage and the like?
Yeah, because I think that poses a lot of unanticipated consequences, safety, fire responsiveness, confusion, having to use the roads. I mean, I think that would maybe solve one problem, but create a lot more.
Okay. So I would ask, at this point then, I would ask for, if there is a second to the motion that we put together.
Already seconded.
I'll second it.
Okay, thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion on that motion itself? Go ahead.
I know the citizens can speak up later on in the agenda, but I'd kind of like to hear from them now. Does it make any sense to,
Before we take a vote?
before we take a vote?
Okay. Is there so I'm going to exercise a prerogative to say that even though we agreed to the agenda in the order that it was in, I would entertain a motion to, at this point in time, suspend the discussion with regard to the motion that's on the table and ask that Section 4A on the agenda be allowed to go forward here.
So
in
moved.
it. Okay. Any discussion on that? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so with that in mind, we're going to suspend further discussion with regard to the motion that's on the table, and I will open it up for public comment. Keep in mind, this is public comment, and it is precisely that. We're not engaged in a give and take and a back and forth conversation. We absolutely, as the Alderwoman points out, interested in wanting to hear anybody and everybody who has an opinion about this and to weigh in on it. But you're going to be dissatisfied if you think that it's going to result in a conversation as we speak right now. The committee has got a job to do, and that is to whether we're going to make a recommendation to the Board of Aldermen. I'm certainly going to be around after this meeting if anybody wants to have a conversation with me personally about what they think should be done about all of this. But I just want to point that out, that this is an opportunity for public comment. And before I open it for public comment, I want to make a public comment on my own, and I want to thank our police department and our public works department, who have, I think, done an excellent job. There's been a lot of criticism thrown about in social media, and most of it is completely unfair. This city did a lot to try to notify the 25,000 cars a day that travel on Manchester Road prior to the bridge going down. We had to cooperate and we had to rely upon a number of other agencies which we had no control over in terms of signage, schedules, and the like. And despite all that, our police department has, in my opinion, operated superbly during that time frame. And likewise, I believe that Dan's Public Works Department have fielded a lot of complaints and have done the things that they can do within their own constraints to advise drivers where the detours are and how to safely get to them. With that in mind, I will open it up to public comment. As you come to the microphone, I'd like you to please state your name and give us your address, and you'll be given up to 3 minutes to make public comment.
My name's Carolyn Wilson. I own a business on Manchester, Time for Dinner, and I just want to speak for all the small businesses on that strip that have been struggling through the last couple of years and are now dealing with a lot of mess. When they had the previous construction, or when it started, and they closed Manchester for a day or two that one weekend, the police department in the beginning of the day allowed people to come from Hanley. Then they stopped all of our customers at about noon and said it was local traffic only, and they just had to figure out how to get there. And it was really challenging and really frustrating, and thank goodness that day we had people scheduled, so they had to figure out how to get there. But it was one of those things that made us feel like we weren't very supported by the city. That being said, I'm wondering if there might be, talking about the possibilities of options, if there might be the option of having a designated detour through the neighborhood instead of people just kind of cutting through willy-nilly however they would want to. I totally understand it would inconvenience the neighbors that live along that route, and it might be too much. I don't really know how many cars go, but it might be more controllable and maybe safer because the kids would know that those are the streets you totally have to stay off of and everything. So I'd just like for you to think about that. As far as the signs on the Hanley side, what I have seen is that they point people to Webster to go down Marshall. And I haven't heard any complaints from Webster. I actually live in Webster. And Marshall had construction on it also, so it's kind of the same thing with Rosalie. So that's the only ones that I have seen. That's that. I also, and I know this is probably not your control, but the detour that it takes you, like when you Brentwood detour to get to Hanley, that takes you all the way to 40 and over and down, is a timely detour. And again, that's doesn't bother our business too much because the people that are coming from that direction, are going back that direction too. But and I know there's probably nothing you can do. We originally on that weekend had told people to turn on Eulalie that one weekend when it was closed right beside us. Anyway, we pay taxes to the city. We love having a business in this city. We just would like for you to be sure to consider those little businesses along there that are trying to keep our heads above water.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Hello, Nikki Savardinos, 2441 Lewis Avenue. With some of the signs that have been up, it's been much better on Lewis. The first day, we had a few extra 100 cars down to the end of Lewis to be able to use driveways for turnaround. It's been much better with the Now Outlet sign that's been deployed there, but we still see plenty of additional cars that are turning that way, thinking that they can get through at the trail there, which on GPS it kind of looks like you could, but it's really not accurate. So one of the things that I think would be extremely helpful, we talked about it a little bit, that Kathy brought up, that there's no signage that tells, except for the one sign that's on the rec center lot. There's nothing that says you can't turn on Brentwood Boulevard. So if I'm coming from Elm, which is the detour to be able to get into the Brentwood area, I don't know that I can't turn right on Manchester and then end up at a dead end. So we need signs on
From Brentwood.
on Brentwood Boulevard that say you cannot go eastbound on Manchester from here. I don't think that it's very clear to many people what Route 100 is. Being able to very clearly state that that it is Manchester that's closed before Hanley. From talking with some of my neighbors, that language is confusing, and if you asked anybody, even people that live along Manchester Road, nobody knows what 100 is. So being able to get very clear on that signage, having kids at Mark Twain, and I'm sure like many others here, our kids all walk to school. More information that this is a school zone and that this is a walking neighborhood where there are kids as young as kindergarten walking around, and then in a few weeks when school is out, they'll be running around the neighborhoods. So anything that we can do to be able to have better signage that there are kids, and especially up through the end of school, that there's a school zone with fines doubled. Let's get revenue from the people who think that they can't obey the laws. And then wanting to know more information when it's available, what streets are the cushions and gates going to be going on so that we, as residents can be able to plan, and then understanding as Sunny was saying, as we're putting those methods in place, what's the measures of success, and what are we saying that, what's the data that we're getting now on what those speeds are getting to, and how are we measuring this is a successful measure that's been put in place, and that we're able to say this is what we're keeping to be able to keep mitigation in place while we work through the rest of this closure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, my name's Michelle Goad. I live on Eulalie 8407. So it's been a couple interesting days, but I will say that the first few days were an adventure on the block. But since the police presence has been there, I've noticed a marked difference in people's driving behaviors. So I would like to commend the police for having that presence. Whether you just write tickets, you just write warnings, I think it's seeing those cars out there or being aware there's that car that parks behind the sign. We know no one's in, but it slows people down on the corner. Yeah, we all know. They don't know. So I would just commend support the use of more Brentwood police officers. I know they're usually camping out, it seems, around rush hour. And just, even if they're just giving warnings, it seems to have had a measurable impact on the speed, on the just level of driving skill I'm watching on my corner. So definitely thank you to the police department for that. My only other suggestion to consider is on the corner of Eulalie and Rosalie, there is a crosswalk connecting to the trail. There's currently a stop sign on Eulalie to Rosalie onto that intersection. There are not stop signs on the other side. And I know that bend on Rosalie as you come down, very east side, people pick up a lot of speed. Not that I've ever picked up speed on that hill. But having a stop sign there and for people to know that they have to stop at the end of the hill might help slow speeds down as people are crossing back and forth on the path. Just a consideration. It could be a tool in a toolbox, but a temporary sign at that crosswalk in both directions might cause people to slow as they enter the neighborhood. But overall, it's gotten better. It's not great, but it's gotten better. So thank you for your support, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah, come on up.
Scott Stinson. I live at 8624 Eulalie. I've lived there for 27 years. And first of all, I want to applaud all of you guys. This is actually exciting. We're getting stuff done. And it's a pain in the butt. And so I applaud all of you guys for working with it. We've been here before when Highway 40 was done. Eulalie had about 2,000 cars a day during that time period when 40 was shut down. And so I trust we're all going to get through it with what you guys are doing. And we neighbors have our own little traffic calming techniques we're using. And they seem to be working okay. But I would like to encourage you guys to think a little longer term. And we have a problem with Eulalie that is not perception. It is reality. 2 years ago, my car was totaled and was in my neighbor's front yard on Eulalie. And everybody that lives on Eulalie has had their car hit if they park in the street more than one time. Mike and I have probably had 10 times each. And it's not safe for the fire department to come down our street. And the political problem is Sonny and Brandon, if they fix the problem, are going to both be voted out of office. I've been told by their previous aldermen, hey, here's the things we can do, but I'm not going to bring it up because I don't want to be voted out of office. And those involve making the street one way at Helen, different directions, maybe making the entrance from the industrial park one way in, maybe making parking on one side of the street with traffic calming. But I would encourage you guys to actually fix the problem on Eulalie long term. Get a traffic engineer, put in traffic calming stuff. It's unpopular. Take Sonny and Brandon out of it and, you know, save their political futures, and you guys dictate to them what they have to do. But let's fix it. Thank you.
Thank you. Kelly, is there anybody online or?
No.
Okay,
No one with their hand raised.
okay, thank you.
My name is Mike Klein, 8634 Eulalie. We first moved on to Eulalie in 1986. And the day before yesterday, we actually had one of our friends find us, stop and notice to give him a ticket. So I was able to stand on my front porch and give him a round. Okay, that's better. That's better. But that was, in all those years, that was the first time that I'd seen a car stopped for a ticket. And I'm talking from 1986. Now, I'm not home all the time, but my recommendation would be, and I know we're talking overtime as well, would be to have more of a police presence on Eulalie so that more people can see, you know, that it's really more than just a sign that says local residents only, or a sign that says 20 miles an hour, you know, that actually the sign is facing uphill, so people are going to be slowing down anyway. It should be on the other side, going downhill. But thank you very much for this chance for us to share our opinions. I love Eulalie. I mean, we see every breed of dog you can imagine going up and down our street every day. It's incredible. So, hindsight is 20/20, but those barriers should have been put down a month ago. And, you know, I think that they would really help. We're not going to really cut down the flow of traffic. And in fact, it might even get worse because people now know, hey, there's a shortcut I can take. I didn't realize this. So, you know, this is an ongoing problem. I think, doesn't Hanley and Manchester open up in August? So, you know, this could be short-term fix. And that's all I have. Thank you very much. We really appreciate your efforts.
Thank you. With that, I'll close public comment. Oh, sorry. I won't quite close public comment.
Thank
Tell us who
you.
you are and where you live.
I'm Amy Stanford, and I'm I'm the other owner of Time for Dinner.
Oh.
And part of our challenge in navigating Hanley is that the detour's not clear. And if it might be possible, just an idea, if we had really clear signage that marked exactly where the detour would be. And it might be possible to go all the way north on Hanley to Strassner, so it wouldn't have to zigzag through so many streets and go all the way to Brentwood and then come back to Manchester. You know, that would be a clear way of doing it. And that way you wouldn't have to go all the way to 40, because that's a mess. You know, and it takes a long time and it's not clear. Also, you know, we're really easy to get to for people who live in Brentwood, so if anybody's hungry.
Thank you. Is there anybody else? All right, I'll close public comment at this point and restart the conversation. We were in the middle of discussion with regard to Sonny's motion, which was seconded. Is there any further discussion with regard to the recommendation to the Board of Aldermen?
Yeah, the point about detour signs going north, I mean, I don't come from Webster coming north on Brentwood, so I hadn't realized the lack of signage there, warning people there, don't turn on to Manchester. So the signage can't be at Manchester, it needs to be down by the station, down the hill by the railroad track. So if we could incorporate that and get that going, but not on Strassner, it's already, people have already found it. My concern with Strassner is that at the stop sign in front of the Y, the cars are stacked up so far, they're going out on, almost out onto Brentwood Boulevard. So coming down the hill, that would be a real pileup if that happened. So we need to get them up to Highway 40.
Further discussion? Roll call vote?
Okay. Alderwoman Sims?
Yes.
Alderwoman O'Neill?
Yes.
Alderman Lockmiller?
Yes.
Chairman Plufka?
Yes. Okay, with
Motion
that.
carries.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. And with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
There's a second. A move and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, everybody.
You forgot to use the seeing no further business.